Welcome back everyone, it's Charlie. This is going to be my complete breakdown and hidden Marvel Phase 4 connections video for the Marvel Infinity Saga of movies, starting with Iron Man 1. What better way to spend the quarantine period than rewatching the MCU movies looking for all the hidden clues and connections to Avengers Endgame and the upcoming Marvel Phase 4 movies that we missed the first time we saw these. I'm doing 2 special Infinity Saga Box Set giveaways for all those Blu-rays as part of this. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber, and I'll be picking from the best comments. I'll also add details about this in the video description. Careful for spoilers for all the Marvel movies so far. I'll number these different details and Easter eggs just to keep track as we go along. The first Iron Man movie is probably the most important Marvel movie ever because it's literally the bedrock of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the present-day incarnation of the MCU. Kevin Feige literally said that they took out a bank loan to make their first couple of films, including Incredible Hulk. But if this first Iron Man pick didn't make enough money, they wouldn't have been able to pay back their loan to the bank, and they wouldn't have been able to make any more Marvel movies. So it was so important that Iron Man work out. Kevin Feige said he also had to fight for Robert Downey Jr. as the Iron Man character because at the time in his career, he was viewed as a risk to traditional studio people. But look what's happened since then in the last 10 years. Kevin Feige now calls Iron Man the heart of the Avengers, which is obviously a clever wink at his arc reactor, which Pepper Potts gave back to him later in the movie as quote-unquote proof Tony Stark really does have a heart. Later seen during Avengers Endgame at his funeral and when the Avengers are assembling on the time travel platform, raising their fists to form the same pattern as his original arc reactor. The opening scene of the movie is Iron Man being driven to their test site while they're listening to AC/DC's Back in Black. AC/DC kind of became his signature music throughout the Iron Man movies, and because so much of Iron Man influences Tom Holland's Spider-Man character, they brought that song back during Spider-Man Far From Home when Spider-Man is making his new suit, mimicking Iron Man's movements when Iron Man was making the Mark III suit.
Oh, I love Led Zeppelin!
Probably one of the best callbacks during Spider-Man Far From Home, even if he doesn't know who AC/DC is. The biggest change that they made to Iron Man's origin story was making it contemporary. A lot of the movie referenced the war in Iraq and Afghanistan in the early 2000s, and this version of Tony Stark, Iron Man, led a version of Stark Industries that developed weapons for the highest bidder, a job that put him in the same social circles as Ulysses Klaue, as he said during Avengers Age of Ultron.
Tony Stark used to say that. To me. You're one of his.
It's still a great Marvel movie today, it still holds up. One of the only things that dates it, though, is the MySpace reference in the car right at the beginning. MySpace was still a thing when this movie was being made, and Facebook was still taking off. They brought that social media joke back around, though, during Avengers Endgame at the beginning when Iron Man is recording that message thinking he's about to die, telling Pepper Potts, please don't post this on social media. He starts out saying that peace is bad for business as he's trying to sell all these weapons, the most selfish he could have possibly been. By Avengers Endgame, in the culmination of his arc, he makes the ultimate sacrifice to save the universe by snapping his nano-infinity gauntlet to erase Thanos and his army. So he starts out making and selling weapons, but then slowly through the course of the first Iron Man movie and through the rest of his movies, he winds up destroying a lot of weapons to get rid of them. When he's captured by the terrorists in this scene, you immediately notice the symbol of the 10 rings behind him, a reference to the Mandarin from the Iron Man comics. We're finally going to see the real Mandarin of the MCU during Marvel Phase 4 in Shang and the Legend of the 10 Rings. In this movie, the 10 Rings are just a clever reference to the cell-based structure of their terrorist organization. At the time, it was Marvel's way of playing it safe with the character they didn't think they could pull off in an actual movie. But they brought the 10 Rings organization back several times through the future Iron Man movies and then during the Ant-Man movie. It wasn't until Iron Man 3 that they actually tried to do a version of the Mandarin, who obviously turned out to be a front for Aldrich Killian and AIM. Aldrich Killian claimed he was just playing on legends and myths to scare people, but fans were so upset with what they did with the Mandarin character fake-out that Marvel produced a one-shot short film, All Hail the King, during which they revealed there actually was a real Mandarin. And he was very, very pissed about what AIM and Trevor had done with his name. That's the Mandarin that we're going to meet during Shang-Chi and the Legend of the 10 Rings. And while the 10 Rings up to this point in the MCU has just been an organization full of people, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the 10 Rings will also introduce the comic book Alien 10 Rings that the Mandarin wears. We meet Rhodey, played by Terrence Howard, Iron Man's longtime comic book friend and ally. The reason Howard was replaced by Don Cheadle when we got to Iron Man 2 is just because of a contract dispute that he got into Marvel with. The song playing in the background when he's trying to introduce Tony is actually a new version of the Iron Man theme song from the classic 1960s Iron Man cartoon. It becomes a running gag during the movie, and we find out that Iron Man even hacked Rhodey's phone later to make the song his ringtone when he was revealing himself as the man in the suit while they were trying to shoot him down. We meet Obadiah Stane, played wonderfully by Jeff Bridges, the dude abides. His arc is a lot like Salieri, with Mozart being jealous of his genius and accomplishments. Later in the movie, when he brings Iron Man the pizza, he starts playing one of the real-life piano pieces written by Salieri on Tony's piano. We meet Happy Hogan, who's played by the director of Iron Man 1 and 2, Jon Favreau. Even though his role was relatively minor in these first couple of Iron Man movies, once Favreau passed on directing duties to other directors, he got way more screen time as Happy Hogan during Iron Man 3, Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home, and he will be back again during Spider-Man 3.
Are you dating?
Yes. What?
Next up, they introduce Christine Everhart, the reporter, who shows up a couple more times as a foil for Pepper Potts throughout the Marvel movies. Within the context of the MCU, she works for the news organization WHIH. They did some viral teasers for Captain America Civil War, bringing her back while she was interviewing some of the other Avengers characters. In the comics, she was a reporter for the Daily Bugle, which we recently learned in the MCU has become a website instead of a traditional print publication. She hears Jarvis, voiced by Paul Bettany for the first time. Jarvis was an actual butler to his father, Howard Stark. The actor who played Jarvis is one of the few people in the MCU to debut on a TV show, then cross over into the Marvel movies, because he debuted on the Agent Carter TV series.
Jarvis?
Tony grew up with a real Jarvis as a little kid. When he passed away and Tony got older, he named his AI Jarvis as a way to honor him. He then went on to become half of the Vision in combination with Ultron's programming. Pepper Potts reminds Tony that he's supposed to speak at his alma mater, MIT, which he decides to blow off because he's still a little bit selfish at this point in the movie, until later in Captain America Civil War, when he's been through all the events of the first Avengers movie, all the trauma of Avengers Age of Ultron. He speaks there freely and establishes a multi-million-dollar education fund to benefit the students. And we'll talk about this later, but that obviously connects now to Spider-Man Far From Home through Mysterio's character. He's tinkering with his hot rod car here, which is a bit of a classic throwback to the same era from the classic Iron Man comics, and it becomes the inspiration for his new trademark colors of red and gold when he creates the Iron Man Mark III armor. His trademark workshop where they filmed all these scenes for Iron Man 1 was in the old Howard Hughes aircraft hangar where he built the Spruce Goose plane. This is especially meaningful because Stan Lee in real life said that he took inspiration from Howard Hughes when he was creating the Iron Man character in the comics. We see the dummy robot for the first time that he created. It shows up during all the Iron Man movies. They brought it back during Spider-Man Homecoming in the Avengers Tower when Happy was packing everything up to head to the new Avengers base. They also brought the robot back during Avengers Endgame as another callback to the first Iron Man film. In the flashbacks, when they board the plane, there's a Ghostface Killah music video playing on the screen behind them when the pole comes out. Ghostface Killah is a huge Iron Man comic book fan. He was supposed to have a cameo scene in the movie. They even filmed it, but it wound up on the cutting room floor. When he wakes up in the cave, Jensen tells him that they met once at a tech conference in Bern. That was later paid off in the Iron Man 3 opening scene in the flashback to the 90s. Jensen was a part of Iron Man's original comic book story, but that was when his origin story was taking place during the Vietnam War, not during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We meet the leader of the Ten Rings, Raza. He is a comic book character, but he's very different. He's a bit of a cyborg. They put some goggles on him later in the burns on his face to make him look a little bit more like his comic book self. But when Tony catches him villain monologuing, he talks about conquering the Far East. He starts playing with his special ring. It's another subtle reference to the comic book Mandarin in his 10 Rings of Power. But this ring that Raza is wearing is not one of the actual 10 Rings of Power. Iron Man starts tearing down his weapons of war to create his first arc reactor in the Iron Man Mark I suit. It's another metaphor for the path of his character, like I said, not wanting to profit from war anymore and trying to get rid of weapons of war. Marvel has used this iconic sound of him banging his hammer in their different movie trailers, all over the promos for all the Avengers movies and even non-Avengers movies. They even brought it back at the end of Avengers Endgame, playing it after the credits as a way to bookend the Infinity Saga of movies. They open with him banging, they end with him banging. The actual Iron Man theme that's synced up with this hammer banging was composed by Ramin Djawadi, who most of you know is the person who did the theme music for Game of Thrones. He also does a lot of other HBO series and big movies. Him being stuck in the cave is an allegory for Joseph Campbell's hero's journey in the trial of the innermost cave, the time in a hero's journey when they're given their greatest challenge, and only when they overcome that challenge can they exit the cave and continue on their path. There's a bit of a celebrity cameo when Iron Man starts his run out the cave, tearing through all the terrorists. This is Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine. Iron Man dodges a missile from Raza that he later also executes when he's saving the villagers in the Iron Man Mark III suit, dodging another missile. Then there's the iconic Burger King scene, which is a big deal for several reasons. In the movie, it's a little product integration and meant to be a funny moment to deflate some of the tension of him just having escaped a near-death experience. Then later they reference the scene at Iron Man's funeral when his daughter Morgan Stark asks Happy for a cheeseburger and he remembers the original moment saying, "Your dad loved cheeseburgers too."
I'm gonna get you all the cheeseburgers you want.
But going one more Inception layer deeper, when they filmed this original Burger King scene, it was actually referencing a very personal, real-life moment Robert Downey Jr. had in the early 2000s when he was still having a lot of drug problems. He said that one day he was sitting in his car in Los Angeles with a bunch of drugs in a Burger King burger, and it was all just so gross that it made him completely rethink his life and how he'd arrived at this moment. He went and dumped all his drugs in the ocean, which they later referenced during Iron Man 3 when he dumps his arc reactor in the ocean, a nice metaphor about the path his life has taken in real life and in the movies. But then we meet Coulson for the first time, and we get our first big SHIELD reference. The SHIELD acronym, Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division. They make a joke about the title being really hard to pronounce. Coulson makes a couple different name jokes, which are references to the original meaning of the SHIELD acronym, which has changed a couple times in the comics. It used to be Supreme Headquarters International Espionage Law Enforcement Division. Also a bit of a mouthful. Iron Man pisses off Obadiah Stane when he announces Stark Tech won't be making weapons anymore. Obadiah Stane references his comic book name, Ironmonger. Then we move on to Pepper Potts helping Iron Man remove his first arc reactor and switching to the new one, saves it later, gives it back to him as a gift, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. As I said, they bring it back around when Iron Man uses it to save his life after Obadiah Stane steals the new arc reactor, and then again during his funeral during Avengers Endgame, just tying things back to the beginning. It's a great visual metaphor for his hero arc across the Infinity Saga of movies and becoming the metaphorical heart of the Avengers. When he's making the Iron Man Mark III armor and Jarvis almost paints it all gold, that's a reference to the golden variant Mark I armor from the classic comics. Stan Lee has a funny cameo scene with Iron Man mistaking him as Hugh Hefner at the party. He was playing himself, he was playing Stan Lee in the movie. There was even a deleted scene later when Iron Man realizes it's Stan Lee and apologizes. Stan Lee says, "Don't worry, this happens all the time. I get mistaken for Hugh Hefner a lot." When Iron Man learns about the crisis in the Middle Eastern town and wants to help out, he finds out that it's actually Jensen's hometown, Gomera, that he told him about in the cave. When those jets are chasing him, they make a couple of Whiplash references about the comic book villain who would eventually go on to be the villain of Iron Man 2, Ivan Vanko, aka Whiplash. The pilots call out the name Whiplash on the comms, then later Iron Man is making fun of Rhodey with the other men. He says he hooked up with a dude named Ivan. While this is all happening, Obadiah Stane is in his house getting pissed off watching the news. You see a chessboard in the background. That's actually a clever reference to the villain group he created in the comics called the Chessmen. When Iron Man comes back to his lab, you see the prototype Captain America shield for the first time laying on the table. When Pepper Potts goes to steal the files off of Stane's computer, one of the files actually says Lebowski because Jeff Bridges is the dude. They also reference Lebowski during Avengers Endgame when Iron Man shouts at Thor to get out of the way. We get that famous scene of Stane yelling at William Ginter Riva for not being as smart as Tony Stark, which would later inspire him to join forces with Mysterio, another disgruntled Stark Tech employee, and try to steal his orbital weapons platform technology. He also steals all of Mysterio's files and technology at the end of that movie, so there still technically could be a Mysterio in future movies as part of a Sinister Six team. He's played by Peter Billingsley, who in real life most people know as the little kid Ralphie from Christmas Story. He's a longtime friend of Jon Favreau, so that's why he showed up during the Iron Man movies. When Obadiah Stane goes to steal Tony Stark's arc reactor, he paralyzes him briefly, which Iron Man later borrowed the technique when he was trying to steal the Infinity Gauntlet off Thanos using Mantis to temporarily paralyze him. We start to get a whole bunch of Roxxon and Easter eggs during the big final fight against Ironmonger. You notice in the background there's a Roxxon building. Roxxon shows up all over the MCU movies and TV shows, Agent Carter, Iron Man 3, Thor, Cloak and Dagger, Daredevil, Netflix. Then the movie subverts the long-standing trope of the superhero identity. when Iron Man just cast the doors wide open, revealing himself, "I am Iron Man," one of the most iconic lines in a movie in the last 15 years. Kevin Feige himself revealed that it wasn't in the original script. It was an improv from Robert Downey Jr. on the day they filmed it. They then brought the line back in his final defeat of Thanos when he snapped his Nano Infinity Gauntlet. A perfect line to go out on.
And I am Iron Man.
We get our very iconic post-credit scene with Nick Fury coming to tell Iron Man about the Avengers and set that movie up. But in an alternate deleted version of this scene, he also references the X-Men, Spider-Man, and the Hulk because at the time, Kevin Feige had always hoped that they'd be able to cross over all those characters with the Avengers movies, Kevin Feige himself having worked on the original Bryan Singer X-Men movie at Fox. But my next breakdown and Easter eggs video is going to be for Incredible Hulk, because we're going in release order. That video will post in the next couple of days. Make sure you have alerts on for my channel so you don't miss that video. Everyone, let me know in the comments if you spotted any big Easter eggs and Marvel Phase 4 connections during the first Iron Man movie that I didn't mention in the video. And click here to learn about all the big things in Thor 4 Love and Thunder that Taika Waititi just teased. And click here for my brand new Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse 2 teaser trailer and Easter eggs video. Thank you so much for watching. Everyone stay safe. I'll see you guys tonight.